Okay. So, hello, class. We are getting into the second half of Unit 1. This is our second class of the semester, and I'm happy you all are here. But before we get started, we are going to actually go over this worksheet from last weekend. So, would anybody want to give me your opinion? Obviously, this right here. I'm not going to have people speak out about because it is kind of simple just to label, and I can hop over to this one. We could see here that here is the Ottoman Empire,
Mm-hmm.
here is the Safavid Empire, and here is the Mughal Empire. So if we're going back to that sheet, roughly, and how exactly to see that, we would say over here in the Middle East would be the Ottoman Empire. Over here in the Eastern Middle East would be the Safavid Empire. And then India region would be the Mughal Empire.
Okay.
But I do want to ask, do you think was the most prosperous and why? Yeah. Anybody have an opinion on that, or what do you think?
Uh-huh. Hold on. I remember I typed. Did you turn off the worksheet or?
Oh yes, I can share it again and show you. So the second question: which civilization in South America, the Maya, Aztec, or Inca? So the three ones that we went over. Which do you think was the most prosperous and why? And this answer, it really could be any of these. Experts do say, historians I should say, do say that it's the Inca because they were so prosperous and they had many of the resources, or they started many of the many things that were definitely advanced. For instance, they had a social class, strong government. They also had that they built roads and beautiful, including Machu Picchu in Peru. So the first question, out of the five elements of historical perspective, which one do you think are the best? Do you think you're the best at using when viewing history? And this is just your opinion. Remember the five historical perspective points. 1, evaluating and analyzing primary or secondary sources. 2, contextualization. 3, corroborating your evidence. 4, causation, or why did things happen. And 5, producing an effective historical interpretation. So, back to class. Which one of those 5 do you think you're the best at using?
Is there any students want to?
And this is again just your opinion. And all you have to do, you can just say what one that you think you're good at using.
Yeah. Okay, I can answer it. I think the most. I think for me, I would say the last one, like producing an effective historical interpretation.
Yes, and
because it's really, I think, for those historical facts we have already known, and many people have already done research on that. So I think it's more unique to produce an historical interpretation that is new. Yeah.
that is awesome. Yes, and you are exactly right. It is a it's something that you can offer your opinion to based on how you analyze or think about something, analyze a historical source or an event. I mean, if you, from your background information, you can maybe come up with your own interpretation, as it's said in there, and really come up with something that can influence other people as well. And because let's say June, you you come up with
Uh-huh.
this new perspective on an event, and then people start saying, wow, that is a really interesting perspective. We've never thought about that before. And then it starts becoming a popular thing. And
Yeah.
uh, then people start thinking, oh my gosh, you've kind of started a way of thinking for other people. So it's definitely an important skill to learn, and it can have a lot of influence.
Mhm.
Uh, so thank you.
No
And
problem.
so I'm going to share the screen again and go to question number three, or four, I should say. What do you think? So, do you think the world would be different if civilizations from the Americas were always being influenced by Afro-Eurasia, or the Roman Empire, the Greeks, um, Mesopotamia? If these civilizations in South America that were till up to about the 15th century were not influenced at all, almost at all, by the other parts of the world, do you think that the world would be different today?
Hmm.
And I think one important note here is that there's a book out there called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond,
Uh-huh.
and he talks about how war the old world, so Afro-Eurasia, had advanced warfare. They brought their diseases over that they were already immune to, and they also had the the tools and machinery to become prosperous. And South America, civilizations in South America that were very influential, but they just did not have the immunity, they didn't have the weapons, and they didn't have the tools uh,
Mhm.
to keep their civilization, so they were overtaken. And um, I think that four would be a definite yes. It would be different because we would still have many of those civilizations in South America, and we would still we would probably see a lot more trade and trading routes, I should say, and we would also see uh, definitely a diverse populations throughout the world. I mean, it would be a much different world if the those civilizations in the Americas were always part of Afro-Eurasia.
Sorry.
So, does anybody have any questions about last unit?
Um, so the definition of Afro erosia erasure um, is that the district that is not in North America.
Yes. So Afro-Eurasia actually so that's just those are the three continents that and it's in the name. So Africa, and then
Oh, and
just Europe,
Asia.
and Asia. Those are all that
Oh,
right there. That with Pangaea, the where um the world plates shifted, and we got to where we are today with the positioning of everything. If we're using the theory of Pangaea, at one time the entire world, all of the landmass in the world was just one big clump. But over time, those spaced out, and we have the map that we have today. And North and South America were actually connected. So North America was actually connected to Asia for a long time through the Bering Strait, a land bridge made of ice. And this actually would melt, and so we would be separated. You would have the Americas, North and South America, and they would be on their own. And then Afro-Eurasia, Europe, Africa, and Asia, and we can also include, Southeast Asia, was one together as well. So this definitely, impacted a lot after this land bridge melted because for a long time, no one knew that there was North and South America. They were, living thinking that Africa, Asia, and Europe were the only, places on Earth. And really, with scientific advancement and people started, map makers
Mhm.
just starting to learn more about the world and becoming more curious, that's when, in the 15th century, we really started venturing off to the Americas. And so, to answer your question, yeah, it's the old world would be known as Afro-Eurasia, Africa, Asia, Europe, because the old world it's called the old world because that's where that's where civilization began, and that's where many of the most influential civilizations um, arose. And then the New World would be the Americas, which also produced many influential civilizations. So,
Oh, okay.
um,
Huh.
does anybody else have any questions? Um, well, if not, we are going to get into the second part of Unit 1. So, and so we are going to, and can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So we are now going to talk about the societies and empires in Africa. So last week we were finishing as we talked about civilizations in the Americas, North America, which had the Pueblos and Cahokia Mounds from the mound builders and the Anasazi. And then we had civilizations in the Americas, the Inca, Maya, and Aztecs. So here's Tenochtitlan, and here's Machu Picchu. And then we talked about the expansion of the Muslim world, and three of the most prosperous civilizations of all time. That all three happen to be um, um, Muslim, and that was the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire. And so now we're going to talk about societies and empires in Africa. And
Cool.
yes, and actually, we were just talking about Muslim empires. These three Muslim empires. Muslims also had a great influence on many African nations, converting some African rulers to Islam. And these African rulers would actually base their governments upon Islamic rule. And even when we look at Africa today, there are countries in Africa that still are the majority Muslim, including um, Egypt. I mean, is one of the most heavily Islamic nations in the world. And so, in the 11th century, Muslim reformers founded the Al-Ravid Empire in Central Africa. And this empire, the members of this empire, came from a Berber group living in Western Sahara in what is today Mauritania. So, the Almoravid dynasty and Almohad Caliphate would become two of the greatest empires in northern Africa. And you would really this would be the Almoravid, which is here it is spelt out. This is the one empire that you should know in northern Africa. Very prosperous, And in Western Africa, some of the most prosperous nations in Africa would actually arise. So in Northern Africa, you had you had your resources still, but really Western Africa had the two most, I would think, two of the most prosperous empires of all time. And this is the Empire of Ghana, which would arise in the 800s, and it thrived on gold and salt trade. And Arab traders would cross the desert in caravans to load up on salt from the Ghana Empire. Um, it was Western Africa. Something you should know is that salt, but especially gold, is very, very prosperous in these regions. So Islam would also spread through trade, and eventually Ghana's rulers would convert to Islam. So it was interesting because the these Islam traders, or Muslim traders, I should say, they would not force anybody to convert to their religion. Rather, they would have such an influence because they would travel all over Eurasia trading, and they would just talk to people about their faith, um, and people would actually convert and say, oh, I went to learn about your God, and I went to learn about your faith, and they would actually convert to it, not through force, but it would
Wow.
be just through influence. And so these Muslim traders, they really took great pride in their faith, and that influence, obviously, because many of these African rulers would also convert. So,
Oh, can I ask a question?
of course.
Okay, so the Empire of Ghana, don't they have their own religion and they suddenly convert into Muslim? How like,
Oh,
don't they have their own religion originally?
that is a good question. Uh, One that I do not have an answer to, actually. But let's use the Al-Ravid Empire for example. And the religion, they may have some of their, they at that time they could have had small religions, small things that they were they more minute faiths, so they weren't really these big religions. But the Abrahamic faiths, such as Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, uh, these were so influential throughout the world that really I think they would end up becoming influenced by them. So a good question, and I mean they could have had their some sense of a faith, but really, I mean, I think that Islam, Christianity, and Judaism really, um, once they heard about these and started incorporating these faiths into their societies, they converted.
Okay.
But a good question. Thank you for asking.
Oh.
Sorry, I have another question.
Of course.
So I'm curious about you said that people convert to Islam after they trade with traders from the Muslim world. So
Mhm.
do the traders influence the people they
Mhm.
trade with, or do they influence the maybe the rulers from the
Mhm.
Ghana empires, and then the rulers force their people to live in Islam?
Right. And so they would have great influence on these they would have great influence on both the rulers and also some of the traders within that region. So if that makes sense. So you would have you would have quite a bit of influence from these traders on just, let's say, the regular people, and these people would really start to incorporate the Islam into their lives and start practicing. And so I would think that some of these rulers were directly influenced through them, but also they could have been influenced because they saw that neighboring empires were also under or using Islam as their main religion, but also because many people throughout the civilization or the empire, they really they, they were all starting to convert to Islam, so it was kind of a majority type of thing, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So and so and kind of uh, to say exactly what we're talking about. So Islam would just spread through this trade, and eventually Ghana's rulers converted to Islam because of this influence and the fact that many of their people were also converting through the influence of the traders. And in 1076, the Muslim Al-Ravids of northern Africa, as we just talked about, completed their conquest to Ghana. And so the Muslim Almoravids that we just talked about would actually take over Ghana. They would conquer Ghana.
Oh.
But
What?
1235, the kingdom of Mali had emerged, and like Ghana, its empire thrived on gold. And Mali had two really influential rulers. You had Sun Diata and Mansa Musa, and they would cause the empire to experience turmoil, actually, and it would eventually fall because of these two, as Mansa Musa's successors lacked his ability to effectively govern. So those two were influential, but unfortunately, the people that followed them ended up hurting the empire, which seems to happen a lot. If you get a ruler in some of these empires, especially if the ruler is the head and they say whatever they say goes, if you don't have a good ruler, you can risk your entire civilization, your entire empire. And we are now going to actually watch a video on Matsumusa, one of the wealthiest men in the world. And this
Yes.
he was one of the richest men in the world, if not the richest man ever. And so here is a video. And can everybody see this video?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, yeah, so it's just about 3 minutes long, 3-4 minutes long. And yeah, so here we go.
Oh, we cannot hear the sound.
Ooh, you cannot hear? Uh-oh. Okay. That is interesting. Let me see. In that case, I don't know if I will be able to do the video. But
Or maybe you can send it later.
I will actually, yeah, I will go ahead and put it. I will just put it in the chat afterwards. But Matsumusa, his net worth, he was the emperor of Mali, as we just said. He had a net worth of, or he was worth about $400 billion. And he did this through obviously gold and being, I mean, Mali had so much gold and he controlled this gold and the trade of it. And he would actually go to do he was Muslim himself. And and part of Islam tradition, you go on a pilgrimage to to the Holy Land of Mecca, and he was taking his pilgrimage, and he actually would along the way would stop, and he ended up stopping, I believe, in Egypt, and he bought up everything there. He bought all these resources, and one of the resources there actually had an inflation because he bought so much, which means that the price of that was insane because he just bought and bought and bought, and he had a caravan of hundreds of camels. So
Oh my gosh.
very wealthy and but also an effective ruler, so a very influential ruler. Um, so um, One of the greatest southern empires of Africa was Great Zimbabwe. And Great Zimbabwe was also built on the gold trade. How surprising. It was connected by a trade route and was suitable for farming. And the Great Zimbabwe actually became the most prosperous empire until it was mysteriously abandoned in 1450. And no one, this is again, it's really frustrating to historians on like why some of these civilizations, these really powerful and prosperous civilizations, just disappear. And and really we see that there are always many theories from historians on how these civilizations fell, such as the Maya in South America. Remember, they mysteriously disappeared, and they're thinking, well, maybe it was famine, starvation, somebody else took them over. But one theory about what happened to Great Zimbabwe was environmental. It was a combination of overgrazing and drought that caused the soil to become exhausted. And thousands of people lived around this empire, and there could have been a famine issue again. So you really don't know the weather, the climate. It's very influential on these civilizations because they didn't have air conditioning, they did not have heating, they did not have refrigerators, they could not cook their meats as well um, in certain parts. So really, I should say preserve their food. So the Mutapa Empire was thought to have actually replaced the Great Zimbabwe. And in the last part of today's lesson, we will be discussing the Hundred Years' War and the Black Plague. But first, here is a picture of Matsumusa, and this is there are many pictures of him. There's actually a map that was created um, during the time in which he lived in the 13th century. And on this map, you had many. It was made by a European map maker, and it would show Europe as all this real prosperous area. It would show parts of Asia as these really rich and powerful. But Matsumusa was actually on that map because they said, oh, he had so much power and wealth and influence on the world, we're going to add him in there. And this could have been what one of his caravans looked like. As you see, these are camels all through all these camels, this whole caravan carrying goods from different locations as he went on his pilgrimage. So,
Huh.
The last part we'll be talking about, we'll be focusing on Europe here, the bubonic plague and the Hundred Years' War. Two of the most important events in European history, and the Hundred Years' War would actually mark the end of the Middle Ages. So during the 1300s, an epidemic struck parts of Asia, North Africa, and Europe. 1/3 of the population of Europe would die of the deadly disease known as the bubonic plague, or Black Death. And the plague began in Asia and infected parts of Asia, the Muslim world, and Europe through trade routes. And it was actually caused by black rats on trading ships that carried fleas. And these fleas were infested with a harmful bacteria, and people during this time did not exactly bathe, and they did not know, they would bathe, but they did not know the importance of hygiene and cleanliness. So almost all people would come into contact with these fleas from these rats. So let's say there is a trading ship that's coming in um, from I don't know, Italy, and it's carrying these rats, and it lands at a port in Portugal. These rats would be on the boat from Italy, which came from Asia, and the rats would come and they would run throughout, the city, and the fleas would jump off and infect people. It was really a nasty, nasty disease to catch. And uh, the plague would take about 4 years to reach every corner of Europe. And some of the effects of the plague would include a sharp decline in population. Obviously, 1/3 of everyone in Europe died, which is crazy to think about because Europe was thought to be, I mean, it was um, one of the most powerful and influential regions during this time.
Hmm.
And obviously, because of this, a decline of trade would occur. Um, and peasant revolts in Europe would also begin because the nobles, or the heads, the nobles are above the peasants, and the nobles would resist peasant demands for higher wages. These peasants would say, hey, we need more money, we need food, people are buying all this food, and we need money to survive. And the nobles would say, no, no can do. And so peasants would start revolting, asking for more money. Um, and the unfortunate massacre of Jews, because they were falsely blamed for the plague. And um, unfortunately, throughout history, uh, Jews, people that practice Judaism, they have been discriminated against, and we really saw this during the Black Plague, as they were massacred because people had falsely blamed them. And of course, we saw this during the very sad events of World War II, in which we
Mhm.
had the concentration camps and the Holocaust. Um,
So the reason why they're being discriminated against by so many times is because their religion, and I heard there's a saying that is because they're rich.
and you heard that it's because they're rich?
Because they know how to do business and they're richer. So
Yes, it's they it's one of those things where when I first learned about, I had obviously no idea that, or now I did, but I had no idea that they throughout history they were discriminated against. And it was and they were Jews were often taken as scapegoats, and accusations would spread that they created the disease by poisoning wells. Um, and they were actually less affected than other people, since many Jews, um, they chose not to use the common wells of towns and cities. Jews were also sometimes, um, they would be tortured to confess to poisoning wells. So, um, very, very sad what they would do, but it makes you think, why do we have to discriminate against
Yeah.
these against people in general? And throughout history, people look for people to blame, and that's something that
Yeah.
we should never do. We should always seek out the facts and truth. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, but thank you for your uh, insight there, June. I did not know that they were effective businessmen and women, so that's another reason why they could have been discriminated against.
Oh.
So
Hmm.
the and one of the last effects, so there were five main effects that I talked about. So the Catholic Church which was extremely uh, influential during this time. They would actually lose credibility as the prayers to stop the plague would fail to work, and Catholic priests, would start abandoning their duties. So this was big because this effect would directly was one of the causes could have been one of the causes of the scientific revolution, where people started really really they were starting to look at churches and say, is this fact, or is this true? And they started questioning, and during the scientific revolution, we'd have many theories that came out that were against that go directly against faith. So, um, in the midst of this disastrous plague, war between England and France would also break out in Europe. So Europe was having a lot of interesting things going on, and the war would become known as the Hundred Years' War, and would actually be fought over the course of 100 years, more than 100 years. It would continue on and off from 1337 to 15 or excuse me, 1453. So that is roughly 116 years. And the war was started because the last French king died without a successor. So the last French king, as this French king, he died, and nobody could fill his place. So England's Edward III said, "I have the right to claim this throne for him. I'm going to go and claim his seat." And the French did not approve. They did not approve of this Englishman taking the throne. So war was declared between England and France. And it would actually be won by the French when they drove the English out of their country. So of there was a small section of France that England owned, and they were saying, "Oh, we should own more of this. We should own more." And yeah, the French they brought a good military, good warfare, and they would actually drive England out. So England would go their other way. They would resort, and they would move back into the British Isles, and France would reclaim their entire territory.
Wow.
And some of the impacts of the Hundred Years' War included definitely a feeling of nationalism in England and France. Somebody's going to say, if they're from England, they're wearing that with pride. They're saying, I'm English, and I wear that with pride. If you're from France, I'm French, and you could see it, especially when there's war between two very powerful countries, um, how people would react if they're from these other countries. So the power and prestige of the French monarch also increased. And then the English would actually suffer a period of internal turmoil in which two noble houses fought for the throne. And this was really caused just because they had lost this war. They had to get their their own their own things in order again. And so the end of the Hundred Years' War in 1453 would be known as the end of the Middle Ages. And this right here is a very powerful picture. This is an illustration during this time of the Black Death. And just take a look. I mean, this does not, I mean, if I were to see this and say, this is what's going on outside your home, I would be very scared. And obviously, this is hyperbole. This is not, no, not a skeleton on a horse did not actually sweep through. But they were thinking that the person that drew this symbolizes the Black Plague coming from the underworld almost, because they depicted it as if he's coming from the underworld because Christianity was obviously very influential throughout Europe, and people thought that there was such thing, and here comes all the troops from the underworld sweeping through and killing innocent people. And it was a very, very sad moment in world history. But does anybody have any further questions?
So
No.
oh, okay.
Oh,
I got a question. Like, so the disease actually indirectly caused the 100 Wars, the 100 Years' War,
the 100 Years' War.
Or they're just two different things.
They are two different things. I grouped them together, and you'll see actually how I did this here. So I grouped civilizations in the Americas together. So that's America, the expansion of the Muslim world, so the civilizations from like around the Middle East, including India, and then also African civilizations. And then I dealt with Europe by talking about the two of the most important events in Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries, which include the Bubonic Plague and 100 Years' War. So these are two separate things. I just grouped them together because they both primarily happened in Europe. Obviously, the 100 Years' War was only fought in Europe, and the Bubonic Plague mostly took place in Europe, but also Asia and Africa, but again, mostly Europe, or at least that's what it mostly affected. So yeah. Any other questions? I thought I heard somebody else speak up. And if not, I will now go to the worksheet for. Let me pull this. I just downloaded this. So I will now go over the worksheet for the last worksheet for this unit, which includes, and can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And so here on this worksheet, the first question, we'll identify the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, and the Great Zimbabwe on the map below. So if you want to print this out and just label where you think they are, or you look up where these empires are. Again, we talked about an influential Northern Empire, Western Empire, Eastern, and also Southern. But I'll give you a hint. Two of these are Western, and one of these is Eastern. And the second question: what impact of the Black Plague, for example, the decline of trade or peasant revolt, do you think had the greatest effect on world history, and why? And obviously, the Black Plague had it had many terrible effects, but which one do you think really had the greatest or a really big impact on world history, and why? And then third, on the timeline below, you'll have 4 boxes. Write 4 events. So, for instance, the rise of the Mali Empire and their dates. So I would put the date that you feel are the most important from this unit. And as I alluded to earlier, you can also include the rise or fall of civilizations. And that is yeah, that's about it. So does anybody have any further questions?
Mm,
No.
No. Okay, if not, have a great rest of your weekend, and yes, I hope that you're enjoying the class, or at least learning something new. And really, next week we will get into further developments throughout the world, moving into the 1500s and 1600s. So, as always, if you have any questions, just send me a note in Skype, and I will get back with you as soon as possible. And yeah,
Okay.
thank you all so much.
Thank you, Henry.
Bye. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thanks, Henry.